Carlos Watson, the CEO and co-founder of Aussie Media, has been found guilty.
Arrested Aussie Media CEO Carlos Watson on fraud charges.
Okay, so you remember Aussie Media, right? That startup that was everywhere for like a minute? It was supposed to be the next big thing in digital media. But dude, the real story behind it is absolutely wild. So picture this. It's February 2021. A bunch of super serious investors from Goldman Sachs are on a Zoom call, ready to drop $40 million into this company called Aussie Media. They're all set, but they're waiting for one last person to join, this big shot YouTube exec named Alex Peter. His approval is the final green light they need. The call starts, but there's a weird problem. Piper can't get the video work, so they decide we'll just do an audio instead. A voice comes on the line, apologizing for all the technical issues. But right away, something feels off. The voice sounds weird, kind of robotic and unnatural.
Hi, how are you today?
And the Goldman guys start asking their usual investor questions, but the answer's just like not adding up. And then it hits them. They're not talking to a YouTube executive at all. They've been scammed by Aussie's own Chief Operating Officer, Samir Rao, who's using a freaking voice changer. This one completely insane phone call ended up unraveling a decade-long web of lies, all because of one guy's ambition. So who was behind running this whole show? That would be Carlos Watson. This whole empire, this whole crazy scheme, it was a vision from day one. He wasn't just along for the ride, he was the architect. Now on paper, this dude looked like the perfect founder. I mean, he checked all the boxes. Harvard grad. He had a fancy job at McKinsey, the consulting firm where all the smartest people in the world go. Then he became a news anchor on MSNBC. He was charismatic, well-connected. He had the whole package. But after years in traditional media, he got an idea. He looked around and he thought, I can do this better. He was tired of the old system and he wanted to create something fresh. A media company for what he called new and next. So in 2013, he teams up with another dude, Samir Rao, and they start Aussie Media. And this is Carlos's baby. It was his concept, his network, his vision to shake up the industry. He was the idea guy. It actually seemed to be working because Carlos is a master at making things look like they work. They were getting big name celebrity interviews.
Well, not for joy, but for my job, yes.
That is hilarious. I love that. That is good.
They threw this huge festival in Central Park called Aussie Fest.
It's part music festival, part TED Talk, part food fair. Thousands of people attending this fest in Rumsey Field in Central Park, where entertainers, innovators, and thought leaders gather.
With people like Hillary Clinton and John Legend showing up. Carlos was a master at networking and building up hype. He made it look easy because he understood something crucial. Perception is reality. If people believed you were successful, they'd invest. And then eventually you'd become successful. I guess that's his philosophy. But behind the scenes, by like 2016, things were starting to fall apart. Throwing these massive festivals and producing TV shows is crazy expensive. The money was burning fast. The whole fake it till you make it attitude that Carlos embraced and was a champion of, he started to crack under the pressure of actual bills that needed to be paid. The super confident founder was slowly turning into a desperate guy, but he was too committed to his own vision to admit it was failing. When the real money didn't show up, they didn't do what a normal company would do, like cut costs or, change our strategy. Nope. Carlos doubled down on the image, keeping up the appearance of being this massively successful company became more important than actually becoming successful. Because for Carlos, admitting failure was not an option. This was his legacy project. And when you're running out of real cash, but you're determined to keep your dream alive, you have to start getting creative. This is where Carlos's story goes from ambitious startup to something way, way, way darker. His need for hype, his refusal to let his idea die, was about to turn into a full-blown fraud machine that he would personally oversee. So how does a company actually run a scam like this? It doesn't start with some dramatic moment. It started the most boring way possible, with Carlos Watson's direct orders to inflate the numbers. The system was simple and it came from the top. Just make every single number bigger. If they actually made $7 million, Carlos would tell the investors they made $30 million. And this wasn't a rogue employee. This was company policy dictated by the CEO and founder. They started creating completely fake contracts, forging back documents to back up insane claims. They weren't just bending the truth anymore. They were building a whole separate financial reality that existed on paper, because that's what Carlos needed to keep his dream afloat. But here's where it gets completely nuts, and it just goes to show you how deep the paranoia went. One of the investors had a kid who was interning at Aussie. The investor's own child was inside the company seeing how things actually worked. And instead of panicking, Carlos and his executives saw this as a threat that needed to be managed. They had to make sure this college intern didn't see the real numbers, because they'd obviously go run and tell daddy what was actually happening. We know this because of internal texts that got leaked later. The executives are literally texting each other things like, "Be careful what he hears," and "always assume he's listening." They were running a counterintelligence operation against a kid who was probably just trying to get some work experience for his resume. I have no idea if the investor was even suspicious or just sent his kid as a spy, or if he was just trying to, thought it was a cool opportunity for his child. Who knows? Either way, Carlos's operation was totally paranoid, constantly looking over its shoulder. Now, the most ballsy part of the whole scheme brings us back to the phone call he started with. The Goldman Sachs call. That was Samir Rao, the COO, using a voice-altering tool to pretend he was YouTube executive Alex Piper. And get this, Carlos Watson was actually texting him during the call, feeding him lines. At one point, Watson texts another executive, "What did we tell him our revenue was?" The guy texts back, "33 million. And Watson replies, "Are you sure? You're gonna get really confused." They were so deep in their lies that they needed a cheat sheet to remember what lie they told to which investor. That was the core of Carlos's whole operation. It wasn't one big lie, it was a tangled web of different lies told to different people, all orchestrated to maintain the illusion. They would alter real TV show contracts to make them look way more profitable. Now, that fake it till you make it culture that Carlos championed had morphed into straight up criminal fraud directed from the top. They weren't a media company anymore, they were a criminal enterprise propped up by fake documents, fake COO, and a bad impression of a YouTube exec. All because its founder refused to let his dream die. And somehow for a while it worked. The investors' money kept coming in, funding the very illusion that was attracting it. All based on Carlos's relentless drive to prove his idea was a success. But you can't keep a machine like that running forever. The whole thing came crashing down in September 2021, and it was the direct result of Carlos's reckless decisions. A reporter from the New York Times, Ben Smith, got a tip about that insane Goldman Sachs call and published a massive expose that laid out their entire scheme.
Joining us right now is Semaphor's co-founder and editor-in-chief, Ben Smith, who broke that story about Carlos Watson back in the fall of 2021 as a media columnist for the New York Times. It rocked the media universe at the time, and
the article just detonated everything that Carlos had built. Investors freaked out. The company basically imploded, almost overnight, because Watson tried to do the quick redemption tour, giving interviews and saying it was all just a big misunderstanding. But the damage was done. The story was out, and you better believe the feds were already listening. The walls closed in fast. To save their own skin, Aussie COO Samir Rao and Chief of Staff Susie Hahn both flipped on Watson. They pled guilty and agreed to testify against him. Then in 2023, the FBI arrested Carlos Watson at a hotel in Manhattan.
Have arrested Aussie Media CEO Carlos Watson on fraud charges.
What followed was a nearly 2-month federal trial in Brooklyn. And the evidence was just brutal. They had real-time text messages from the impersonation call where Carlos was coaching his COO. They had the forged contracts he approved. They even had former friends and colleagues testify against him. In July 2024, the jury found him guilty on every single count. Fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, The guy who insisted his idea was a success, who built an entire empire on lies, was finally staring at the truth. So in late 2024, Carlos Watson was sentenced to 116 months in prison, or like close to 10 years. The court also ordered him to pay back over $96 million to the investors he had scammed. And it looked like the story was finally over. Justice was served, right? But here's the final twist that just makes you shake your head. In early 2025, just a few months into his sentence, Carlos received a full presidential pardon. Now, the pardon completely wiped out the entire $96 million financial penalty. The man who faked an entire media company, convicted of a massive financial crime, walked away scot-free. He left everyone else holding the bill. Great job, Carlos. Hall of Fame scammer.